So, hi, it's a Chronicle of War with Tatiana Popova, and we'll speak today with General Ben Hodges, ex-commander of US forces in Europe. Hi, General.
Hello, Tatiana. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. So, General, we haven't talked over last year, I guess. The war has already been going on for 2.5 years. How do you assess the situation on the battlefield now?
Well, of course, the war has been going on for 10 and a half years, then the large-scale invasion for 2.5 years. And it seems to me now uh, that the situation, I don't want to call it a stalemate because it's not that, but Ukrainian defenders have been able to stabilize it. Russia does not have the ability to knock Ukraine out of the war. The only thing that they can do is to launch missiles against civilian targets. So this is kind of where we are. Um, I think that Russia, with all the advantages after 10 and a half years, has lost 500,000 soldiers. The Black Sea Fleet is underwater or in retreat. The Russian Air Force has failed its two most important tasks of gaining air superiority and interdiction of lines of communication. They failed there. So, and they control less than 20% of Ukrainian territory, despite having all the advantages. And despite the failure of the United States and other countries to commit to helping Ukraine win. So even in these circumstances, Ukraine still stands strong and controls the vast majority of their own territory. And I don't see prospects for Russia changing that. Now, what's frustrating for me is that the United States and Germany and some other countries have stopped short of saying we want Ukraine to win. Instead, the approach of the administration seems to be give Ukraine enough to stay strong, but don't do anything that could lead to Russian escalation. And I think this is a terrible policy. It's a missed opportunity, and it only prolongs the conflict.
Unfortunately, by the way, during last, I think, half a year, latest seizures in eastern Ukraine by Russia took place largely thanks to control or guided aerial bombs. There is any opportunity, any type of weapon which we can use in order to get these airplanes who send these bombs away from Ukrainian territory?
Well, of course, the Biden administration's policy on restricting Ukrainian use of long range weapons provided by the U.S. into Russia, I think is a terrible policy decision. But this flows from the bad analysis that we don't want Russia to escalate. And so Russia is able to operate with impunity from airfields inside Russia and kill innocent Ukrainian civilians. This is bad policy. There is no legal, moral, or military reason to deny Ukraine the ability to use American weapons to hit these airfields inside of Russia. I hope that will change, but I'm not optimistic that it will change until after our election. Um, I just don't sense any move to change policy in the current administration. Of course, other countries like UK have said that Ukraine can use Storm Shadow however they want. So there are some capabilities that Ukraine has, either of their own design or that they get from other countries that would be helpful. Um, Eventually, you're going to see F-16s in the air. Not a lot, but eventually there'll be some. I would imagine that these will be helpful in the what we would call counter air, being able to uh, help reduce the ability of Russia to drop glide bombs on Ukrainian cities. Um, but that's not going to happen overnight.
What else does Ukrainian army lack to win from your point of view?
Well, I think that Ukraine needs to finally make the decision to grow the size of their recruiting and training base and create more units. I know that this has been a political debate about whether or not to increase the size of the army. And I think both for now and for the long term, Ukraine has got to have more brigades, more structure. And there's not a people problem in Ukraine. There's more than enough women and men to serve that are military age, but Ukraine seems unwilling and or unable to do what's necessary to recruit these women and men into the armed forces. This is the job of the government, not the job of the army. It's the job of the government to assure families that if their son or daughter or husband or whoever comes into the military, they will be properly trained, properly equipped, and put into a good unit before they're sent to combat. And if something did happen, that soldiers and the families would be properly cared for. This is the job of the government, and I think if we don't do this, then we will not be able to rotate the units to get soldiers out of the fight for a period of time for retraining, for example, to go through what we would call reconstitution. This is a political decision that needs to be made. Plus, you have to have what we call the institutional army, which is the training and recruiting base, to do officer education, to help develop not just for the war now, but also for the future. I think this is essential for Ukraine to win.
But you know that we started new recruitment campaign this spring, so it's already a lot of people, extra people were recruited. You know. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. In your opinion, is it possible for Russia to have a military confrontation with one of the NATO countries before the end of the Russian-Ukrainian war? Because many experts admit that Putin may do this in a hybrid and any other type of war version.
Yeah, I don't see that happening in a conventional sense while he is still struggling against Ukraine. So it would be foolish to get into a direct military conflict with any NATO country while he is still unable to defeat Ukraine. Now, the fact is he is already at war with us in the non-conventional way. The GPS jamming, the disinformation, the sabotage, the planned assassination of German defense industry leaders. All of these things are happening that are very unsafe. They're illegal, but these are parts of how Russia conducts war. And we need to wake up in the West. We need to realize that Russia's at war with us, even if we're not at war with Russia. Now, the Russians have not suffered any consequences for their very dangerous jamming of the GPS on commercial aircraft and over the Baltic Sea, or of commercial shipping in the Black Sea. They have not paid any price for sabotage that they have done through proxies across Europe, or for their disinformation efforts interfering with the elections of numerous Western countries. And so as long as they don't feel consequences, they're going to keep doing it, just like they flaunt international law with their shadow fleets that take oil out through the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea, and they sell it to the Chinese and Indians. These are the things that they're doing for which they're suffering no consequences. So their behavior is not going to change, obviously, until they suffer consequences.
What do you think? Will Putin be able to involve North Korea army in the military operations in Ukraine?
The North Korean army?
Not weapon, but army, because weapons they already provide from last year.
Yeah. This will be interesting to see if North Korea actually really does provide anything substantial. I saw reports that they were going to send engineer units, for example, but are these engineers with equipment, or are these just bodies with shovels? So I'm interested to see what kind of capability they actually bring. And if they do, if North Korea is willing to weaken themselves significantly to help Russia, then maybe this is a chance to apply some pressure from South Korea against North Korea to make them reconsider what they're doing. The bottom line is, if we help Ukraine defeat Russia, that would leave North Korea isolated anyway. So rather than worrying too much about North Korea, we need to help Ukraine defeat Russia. And then North Korea has no friends, Iran has no friends, and China will be deterred.
By the way, what about China involvement? We have some information in media that they involve in some part of production of Russian weapon. But what do you think?
I think absolutely. I mean, Secretary Blinken has talked about this. Of course, the Chinese are helping Russia with components and doing things to enable Russian defense industry to make weapons. So until we get serious, we in the West get serious about helping Ukraine defeat Russia, we are going to stop short of doing what needs to be done to put the necessary pressure on China. Right now, I think the Chinese are not impressed with what we're saying.
You already talked about F-16, but how do you assess effect of transfer of F-16s to Ukraine? Are they capable to change the course of war? If so, how exactly?
No, there's no one weapon that's going to change the course of the war, but F-16s or any additional fixed-wing aircraft, whatever the type, will give Ukraine better ability to protect their cities. So in what we would call the counter-air role, to use Ukrainian Air Force against Russian Air Force or against missiles that are fired from Russia into Ukraine, that would help. Certainly, I would expect that Ukraine will over time develop more and more experience, gain more confidence using F-16s. The skill and courage of your pilots, that's never a question. And we continue to underestimate Ukraine's ability to do things. But still, it would be prudent that they are cautious in the beginning to build up confidence and experience. You don't want to lose several aircraft right from the beginning. And of course, Russia will come after the bases immediately, or they already are. But fortunately, they're only hitting decoys, it looks like. So I imagine that Ukrainian Air Force will be very clever on how they protect their bases and these aircraft as well.
How can you explain the Kremlin's attitude towards its military, horrifying losses for any other country and army, thousands of dead and abandoned on the battlefield, who nobody evacuating, the wounded who have not recovered and are sent to battlefield again from their last information in open source information?
Yeah, well, of course, this is their tradition. They don't value the lives of their own soldiers the way that Western armies do. They are merely seen as fodder, tools to be used, and so we cannot assume that there's a point where, okay, this is too many casualties and they stop. We have to assume that they will continue to do this. Now, of course, the Russians are aware that there is a domestic price to pay if they have too many casualties from Moscow and St. Petersburg. So it appears that most of their troops come from the poorer parts of the Russian Federation and in different places, not from the two major metropolitan areas. If those two cities start seeing a lot of funerals, I think that begins to have an impact.
Okay, how can you explain so measured and insufficient military assistance from the West to Ukraine, while after the start of German-Soviet war, Western equipment went to USSR in 1,000 of each type, and it's not like that in Ukraine?
Well, the main difference is that in the Second World War, the Allies had realized that they had to defeat Nazi Germany and they had to defeat the Empire of Japan. So they said this was the policy. The strategic objective was unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. We have not done that here. In fact, the administration has not even said what the objective is. They haven't said that we want Ukraine to defeat Russia. Instead, it seems that the objective is more about we don't want Ukraine to lose, but we don't want escalation. And so they're trying to manage it like a rheostat, a heater in your home, which I think is a terrible policy. It's a terrible approach. And all it does is prolong the war. And if you don't have a clear objective, it's very difficult to come up with good policy. So that's why you see these incremental decision-making, drip, 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 delivery of aid. It's because we have not clearly identified and stated what our strategic objective should be.
How do you explain a lot of talks about freezing of existing war line started by Putin, but they then also repeated by other speakers like Orban, who was in Ukraine, then in Moscow, then in Beijing, then in US, by the way. So, and Putin repeating this idea about freezing the line or giving him some extra territories of today controlled by Ukraine areas.
Yeah, these are mostly people that do not understand history or geography, or else they have no respect for the international rules-based order, that they are willing to reward Putin's aggression by forcing or pressuring Ukraine to give up territory. I think this would be a colossal mistake, a strategic error. I think it would be very difficult for any Ukrainian government to be willing to accept that. And they don't have to. I mean, after 10 and a half years, Russia still only controls 18% of Ukraine. And that's without us in the West seriously trying to help Ukraine win. Imagine what would happen if we got serious and used all of our economic tools and lifted the restrictions and made it clear that our policy is for Ukraine to win. This war should have ended last year. Instead, you've got people who are naive, or that they don't care about Ukraine, or that they don't care about the international rules-based order, and they don't understand that if there is some kind of negotiated settlement, that Russia will just wait 2 or 3 years for us to lose interest, and we'll be doing this again. So I don't understand why people like that have so much influence, but unfortunately, they do, and it's also a reflection of the vulnerability of our own societies, that people are willing to, sacrifice parts of Ukraine.
In your last interviews, Telegraph, Voice of America, you said that the West forbids striking deep into Russia, fearing escalation and Putin's threats with nuclear weapons. Does the Western establishment really not understand that the threats of nuclear war and escalation will greatly increase if Ukraine loses?
I didn't understand.
Yeah, I mean, that if Ukraine loses, Putin army became stronger and bigger because of arrested and sent to the army Ukrainians. And in this case, West will be in much more worse and more dangerous situation.
Yes, exactly. That's why our European allies have got to get serious about defense and to recognize that it is in their interest that Ukraine is successful. Because if Ukraine fails, it will only be because the United States and Germany and others did not do everything that we should have done to help Ukraine win. And then Russia will absorb thousands of Ukrainian soldiers that will be forced into the Russian military. And not to mention, there'll be millions more Ukrainian refugees that will be heading into Germany and Poland. So continued disruption of food supplies, continued disruption of energy supplies. There's no positive outcome for Europe if Ukraine fails. So I don't understand why they are not doing everything they can already. But that's why I agreed to talk with a journalist like you, so I can keep advocating for the West to wake up and to do this. I can do one more question.
So last question. You know that last week Russia hit Ukrainian children hospital in Kiev, Ahmadit, by Ha-101 rocket missile. And they did it during peace talks. Like Orban was here, Modi was in Moscow. Why they did that? Because we understand they did it exactly. It was not Ukrainian air defense missile. Why they did it during this trying to do the peace talks?
You remember a couple of years ago when the Secretary General of the United Nations was in Kiev, they launched an attack. Rockets hit Kiev. They murdered Navalny during the Munich Security Conference. And then, of course, they launched this attack not only during the visit of Modi and Orban, but also right at the beginning of the NATO summit. So these are not accidents. This is Russia basically giving the middle finger to all of us, saying that they're not intimidated. And they do it to see what will we do, and apparently nothing. All I can say is that at some point, later than it should have been, people are going to finally realize that the only way you deal with Russia is by defeating them. They have to be defeated, not negotiated with, defeated, and that Ukraine is prepared to do that if we would only give them the tools. And we have to make it clear that this is our objective. This is not charity for Ukraine. This is for the good of all of us in the West to defeat Russia, which will also, of course, deter China.
Thank you, General. It was always a pleasure to talk to you. See you.
I'm so glad we finally got to talk again.
See you next time. Bye.
Be safe.